The groan of the leather banquette was the only sound Sterling Blackwood ever truly respected. It was the sound of submission, of luxury bending to his will. From his throne in the corner of Aurelia, Chicago's most obscenely expensive temple of gastronomy, he surveyed his kingdom of crystal and cream. Opposite him, his perpetually nervous legal counsel, Gerald, nodded so vigorously his jowls quivered, a human bobblehead of acquiescence. They were here to toast the final dismemberment of the Disable Historical Archive, a deal that would net Blackwood a fortune in rare manuscripts and leave a century of Black Chicago history scattered to the winds. Their waitress approached, a young Black woman whose posture seemed too elegant for her simple uniform. There was a quiet dignity in her movements that grated on Sterling's nerves. To her, he was merely the occupant of Table 12. To Sterling, she was an insignificant speck, a momentary obstacle between him and his lobster bisque. He decided to amuse himself. As she stood patiently, notepad in hand, he turned to Gerald, switching to the fluid, aristocratic French he'd perfected at boarding school in Switzerland. His words were meant to be a private jest, a silken whip cracked in a language he assumed was as alien to her as the surface of Mars. He was about to learn that some ghosts don't stay buried, and some insignificant specks have the power to cause an avalanche. The ache in Amara's calves was a familiar, burning thrum, a constant reminder of the chasm between the life she was living and the one that had been stolen from her. It was a world away from the quiet, reverent hush of the archives, where the only sound had been the gentle rustle of century-old paper. She had once worn archival gloves to handle the letters of Haitian revolutionaries. Now she wore a starched black apron that smelled faintly of truffle oil and shattered dreams. Her life was now the gilded cage of Aurelia, a Michelin-starred mausoleum on the Gold Coast where her sensible shoes trod on carpets worth more than her entire student debt. Each shift was a masterclass in self-erasure. She was not Amara Dubois, the 22-year-old art historian who had graduated summa cum laude, the promising young curator whose research on post-colonial Caribbean art had been called paradigm shifting. She was simply the waitress, a smiling, efficient vessel for delivering seared foie gras and reciting the provenance of the evening's cheese selection. She had perfected the art of being attentive, yet invisible, of refilling a water glass so silently that the drinker never noticed her presence. To the patrons, the plates she carried held the pinnacle of culinary achievement. To her, they were just heavy with the weight of her compromised future. Tonight, the air in Aurelia was particularly thick with the oppressive perfume of old money and predatory capitalism. A table of tech bros celebrated a hostile takeover, their laughter grating and loud. Amara moved between the tables like a wraith, her practiced smile a mask that concealed the bone-deep weariness in her dark, intelligent eyes. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Julian, had pulled her aside at the start of her shift. "Table 12 is Blackwood," he'd hissed, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "Sterling Blackwood. Whatever he wants, he gets. Don't make eye contact unless he speaks to you. Just be fast, be quiet, and for God's sake, don't spill anything." Amara knew the name. Every artist, historian, and curator in Chicago knew the name. Sterling Blackwood was not a builder, he was a demolitionist. His firm, Blackwood Acquisitions, specialized in what he euphemistically called cultural asset realignment. He would find historically significant but financially vulnerable institutions, small museums, archives, independent presses, and acquire them, promising preservation. Then, with surgical precision, he would strip them of their most valuable assets for his private collection or sell them at auction, dissolve the institution, and develop the real estate. He was a vulture who feasted on the carcasses of culture. When she approached Table 12, the atmosphere was charged. Sterling Blackwood was even more imposing in person than in the glossy pages of Forbes. Dressed in a bespoke suit of charcoal gray, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a tanned, imperious face, he radiated an aura of absolute, unassailable power. His eyes, the pale blue of a winter sky, scanned everything and appraised its monetary value. With him was Gerald, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his soft, sycophantic core. The third man at the table was older, with a calm, watchful demeanor. He was impeccably dressed, but without Blackwood's ostentatious flair. His name was Monsieur Dubois, a potential partner from a Montreal-based philanthropic foundation, the prize Blackwood was trying to land. "We will begin with a bottle of the 82 Petrus," Blackwood announced, his voice a rich baritone that tolerated no dissent. He didn't look at Amara, but at a point somewhere over her left shoulder. It was a power play, a test. "An excellent choice, sir," Amara replied, her voice steady and professional. She didn't gush or fawn. She simply acknowledged the order and retreated to the wine cellar. The key to surviving men like Blackwood was to be a flawless machine, efficient, respectful, and utterly forgettable. She returned with the wine, presenting the legendary bottle with the practiced reverence the ritual demanded. Blackwood ignored her, engrossed in explaining his business philosophy to Monsieur Dubois. Gerald, however, tracked her every movement, his anxiety palpable, as if a single stray drop of the priceless Bordeaux could end his career. "The key to our model, Jean-Pierre," Blackwood was saying, his English crisp and condescending, "is recognizing that sentiment is the enemy of value. These little institutions are drowning in it. They cling to every scrap of paper, every dusty canvas, believing it all has some intangible worth. We are the ones with the clarity to separate the wheat from the chaff, to monetize the core assets, and dispose of the inefficient remainder." Monsieur Dubois listened, his face a polite, unreadable mask. "A philosophy of pragmatism, Monsieur Blackwood." "Precisely. Pragmatism is simply progress in a business suit," Blackwood declared, gesturing for Amara to pour. He took a sip, swirled the wine in his glass, and gave a curt nod of approval, not to her but to the wine itself, as if it had performed a trick for his amusement. Amara finished the pour and was about to step back when Gerald cleared his throat. "And a round of Pellegrino. Large bottle." She nodded and turned away. As she walked to the service station, a disquieting sense of familiarity began to prickle at the edges of her memory. It wasn't just Blackwood's public reputation. It was the specific cadence of his speech, the dismissive arrogance in his tone. It reminded her of the final, devastating board meeting at the Haitian Art Collective, the place where her career had been born and then murdered in its cradle. The men in suits who had come to realign their assets had spoken with that same chilling, emotionless clarity before they auctioned off a generation of irreplaceable art and padlocked the doors forever. She pushed the memory down. It was a ghost. All powerful, predatory men sounded alike. Her past was a locked room, and she had thrown away the key. Her only goal was to survive the night, collect her tips, and ride the L train back to her tiny, book-filled apartment in Logan Square. The meal progressed, a lavish theater of consumption. Amara moved with the silent grace of a dancer, clearing appetizer plates, serving the main courses, a dry-aged porterhouse for Blackwood, seared scallops for Gerald, and a delicate Dover sole for Monsieur Dubois. Throughout the dinner, Blackwood held court, his voice the only one that mattered. He was clearly working hard to charm Monsieur Dubois, whose foundation was considering a major partnership. The deal, Amara gathered from snippets of conversation, involved Blackwood acquiring the financially struggling DuSable Historical Archive, with the Dubois Foundation providing a grant to digitize and preserve the collection. Amara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what that meant. The foundation's money would provide a respectable public face for the plunder. Then, perhaps feeling confident, or simply wanting to establish a more exclusive circle of intimacy, Blackwood switched to French. It was a logical choice. His guest was a francophone from Quebec, and it created an instant wall between them and the American staff. In his mind, the probability that a young black waitress in Chicago could understand the nuanced, cutthroat vernacular of his world was less than zero. He leaned forward, a conspiratorial smile touching his lips. "Alors, Jean-Pierre, soyons francs. L'archive du Sable est une mine d'or, mais elle est gérée par des imbéciles sentimentaux." He began, his tone becoming sharper, more candide. "So, Jean-Pierre, let's be frank. The Du Sable archive is a gold mine, but it's run by sentimental imbeciles." Amara was polishing silverware at a nearby service station, her back to them. The language hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was the French of her life's passion, Not the simple French of a high school classroom, but the academic, precise French of art journals and historical treatises. Her hands, for a single, terrifying second, froze on a dessert fork before she willed them to resume their circular motion. Don't react. You're furniture. You're invisible. Gerald, ever the toady, chimed in with his clumsy, heavily accented French. Absolument. Nos projections montrent que nous pouvons liquider les manuscrits de la période de la Renaissance de Harlem pour au moins 8 chiffres. Le reste, c'est du foin. Absolutely. Our projections show we can liquidate the Harlem Renaissance era manuscript for at least 8 figures. The rest is just hay. The DuSable archive, the Harlem Renaissance manuscripts. A cold dread mingled with a white-hot volcanic rage began to build in Amara's chest. These men weren't just being arrogant. They were casually plotting the vivisection of a cornerstone of Black American history. In the casual cruelty of their words, the assumption of her ignorance was suffocating. She needed to hear more. She needed to be closer. On the pretext of refilling their water glasses, she moved toward the table, her steps measured and slow. She kept her gaze demurely lowered, focusing on the cascade of water into crystal, her face a carefully constructed mask of benign neutrality. Blackwood, fully in his element, gestured dismissively with his fork in her general direction. Il faut simplement ignorer ces gens-là. Ils font partie du décor, rien de plus. One simply has to ignore these people. They're part of the decoration, nothing more. He then looked directly at Amara, but his gaze was vacant, as if looking at a potted plant. He lowered his voice, speaking to Gerald, but Amara was now close enough to hear every syllable. Regarde-la. Probablement une étudiante ratée. Un joli visage vide, assez bon pour servir la plèbe, mais pas une seule pensée derrière ses yeux. Look at her. Probably a failed student. A pretty, empty face, good enough to serve the rabble, but not a single thought behind those eyes. Gerald snickered, a wet, obsequious sound. Elle fait ce qu'on lui dit. C'est tout ce qui compte. She does what she's told. That's all that matters. The insult was so casual, so profoundly dehumanizing, it was like a slap. It wasn't the worst thing she'd ever been called, but coming from this man, in this context, it was the final indignity. The burning ache in her legs vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. The ghost of her past was no longer a hazy memory. It was sitting at table 12, eating a $200 steak and mocking her in the language she loved. Throughout this exchange, Monsieur Dubois had remained silent. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his water, and for a split second, his eyes met Amara's over the rim of his glass. There was no pity in his gaze, but there was a flicker of something else, a keen, analytical curiosity. He was a witness. Blackwood, oblivious, pressed on, outlining his plan. Le point crucial, c'est la collection haïtienne, complètement sous-évaluée. J'ai de l'expérience avec ça. J'ai rationalisé une collection similaire il y a 3 ans. On en a tiré une fortune. The crucial point is the Haitian collection, completely undervalued. I have experience with that. I streamlined a similar collection 3 years ago. We made a fortune from it. Amara's blood turned to ice. The Haitian collection. 3 years ago. It couldn't be. The world was vast, but the world of high-stakes cultural predation was a small, incestuous pond. Blackwood wasn't just a man who reminded her of the villains from her past. He was the villain. He was the architect of her ruin. He had hidden behind shell corporations and lawyers, and now, years later, thousands of miles away, he was laying his crime bare on her table. Confident in the ignorance of a pretty, empty face, she finished pouring the water, her hand a marvel of steadiness. She placed the pitcher back on her tray, her mind a raging inferno. The years of humiliation, of quiet suffering, of believing she was a failure, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. She was not just a waitress. She was Amara Dubois, and she remembered everything. The rest of the main course passed in a blur. Amara moved through the dining room on pure instinct, her mind a tempest of French phrases, legal terms, and the spectral image of her former life. The rage that had nearly consumed her had cooled into something far more dangerous, a diamond-hard resolve. This was not a random insult. This was a reckoning. She served their desserts, a pretentious, deconstructed tiramisu for Blackwood and Gerald, a simple lemon tart for Monsieur Dubois. All the while, the French conversation flowed, a river of self-congratulation and greed. Blackwood was now boasting about the specific pieces he'd acquired from the Haitian Art Collective, describing priceless artifacts as if they were stock certificates. At last, the meal was over. The plates were gone. The last drop of the Petrus had been drunk. Sterling Blackwood leaned back, the picture of smug satisfaction. He caught Amara's eye and snapped his fingers, a gesture so dripping with entitlement it made her stomach clench. L'addition, he commanded in English, the one French word every rich American knew. Then as she turned to fetch the check, he fired his parting shot in French, a final dismissive flick for the amusement of his companions. Dépêche-toi, ma fille. Nous avons des choses plus importantes à faire que d'attendre que tu traînes tes petits souliers jusqu'ici. Hurry up, girl. We have more important things to do than wait for you to drag your little shoes over here. Amara stopped dead. Her back was to the table. The opulent dining room seemed to dissolve around her. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of other conversations, the distant wail of a city siren. It all faded into a dull roar. There was only table 12 and the stinging echo of his words. Hurry up, girl. She took one deep, centering breath. This was the moment of choice. She could bring the check, accept a tip that would likely be an insult in itself, and vanish back into the anonymity she had chosen as her shield. It was the safe path, the sane path. But 3 years of swallowing her pride, of accepting the injustice, of believing the lies they told about her, it was over. She turned around. She walked back to the table, not with the hurried, subservient steps of a waitress, but with the measured, confident stride of a curator walking into a gallery. She held no check presenter. Her hands were empty, clasped calmly in front of her. She looked Sterling Blackwood directly in the eye, holding his gaze until his expression of bored impatience shifted to one of annoyance. A small, knowing smile touched Amara's lips. It was not her service smile. This one was sharp, precise, and held no warmth at all. And then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it sliced through the restaurant's ambient noise like a scalpel. Her French was not merely fluent, it was perfect. The Parisian accent of the Sorbonne, clean, academic, and utterly devastating. Excusez-moi, monsieur, she began, her tone flawlessly level. Votre addition arrivera tout de suite, mais je me dois de vous corriger sur un point. Excuse me, sir. Your bill will be right out, but I must correct you on one point. The effect was instantaneous. Blackwood's smug expression did not just fall, it imploded. His jaw went slack, his eyes widening in stunned disbelief. He looked as if a piece of the decor had just quoted Voltaire. Gerald froze, a spoonful of Zabaglione halfway to his mouth, his face turning the color of curdled milk. He shot a panicked glance from Amara to Blackwood and back again. The only man at the table who did not look shocked was Monsieur Dubois. He simply set down his coffee cup, placed his napkin neatly on the table, and leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Amara with an expression of absolute, undivided attention. Amara's eyes never left Blackwood's. Quand on s'adresse à une dame, même si elle n'est qu'une serveuse, le terme « ma fille » est à la fois familier et condescendant. Mademoiselle ou jeune femme serait plus approprié. Cela dénote un manque de respect. When addressing a lady, even if she is just a waitress, the term girl is both familiar and condescending. Miss or young woman would be more appropriate. It shows a lack of respect. She let the grammatical correction hang in the air, a small, perfect strike. It was a statement not about language, but about power. Blackwood finally found his voice, sputtering in a clumsy mix of French and English. Qu'est-ce que... What in God's name do you think you're doing? Amara's smile tightened. She echoed Gerald's earlier sycophantic remark, her French now laced with ice. Je fais ce qu'on me dit, c'est tout ce qui compte, n'est-ce pas? Mais parfois, on entend des choses. Par exemple, que les manuscrits de la Renaissance de Harlem ne sont que du foin, ou qu'un projet appelé rationalisation est simplement un mot de code pour le pillage de la collection haïtienne d'une institution. I'm doing what I'm told. That's all that matters, right? But sometimes one overhears things. For example, that the Harlem Renaissance manuscripts are just hay, or that a project called streamlining is simply a code word for the pillaging of an institution's Haitian collection. Every word was a precisely aimed dart. Gerald dropped his spoon. It clattered against his dessert bowl with a sound that seemed to reverberate in the sudden pocket of silence around their table. Blackwood's face, which had been pale with shock, was now a ghastly, bloodless white. He was truly seeing her for the first time, and in his eyes a horrified dawn of recognition was beginning to break. He didn't know who she was yet, but he knew she was not a waitress. She was a witness. She was a threat. The bubble of tension around table 12 was so thick it felt like a physical barrier. Sterling Blackwood stared at Amara, his formidable mind scrambling, trying to solve the impossible equation she presented. He was a man who prided himself on controlling every variable, on anticipating every contingency. And now a random waitress had just recited, verbatim, the predatory core of his latest secret conquest. He attempted to regain command by falling back on the brute force of his authority. C'est absurde, he snarled in French, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Vous n'avez aucune idée de ce dont vous parlez. Vous avez écouté aux portes une conversation privée. C'est un motif de renvoi immédiat. That's absurd. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have been eavesdropping on a private conversation. That is grounds for immediate dismissal. Amara did not even blink. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years was being incinerated in the blaze of this single incandescent moment. Oh, je crois que je sais exactement de quoi je parle, Monsieur Blackwood, she replied, her voice still perilously calm. Le pillage de la collection haïtienne, par exemple. Ce n'est pas un plan nouveau, c'est une stratégie que vous avez déjà utilisée il y a 3 ans. À l'époque, vous vous êtes caché derrière une société écran nommée Veridian Heritage Group pour dissimuler les vrais investisseurs. Oh, I believe I know exactly what I'm talking about, Mr. Blackwood. The pillaging of the Haitian collection, for example. It isn't a new plan. It's a strategy you already used 3 years ago. Back then, you hid behind a shell company named Veridian Heritage Group to disguise the true investors. At the mention of Veridian Heritage Group, Gerald made a small, strangled sound. It was an old entity, buried under layers of corporate paperwork, a tool used for their most ruthless and legally questionable acquisitions. For this woman to know that name was not just impossible, it was apocalyptic. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, the bluster draining away to be replaced by a cold reptilian focus. Who are you? He demanded, switching back to English, as if his native tongue could somehow reassert his dominance. This was it. The culmination of 3 years of exile. Amara stood a little straighter, and for the first time that night, she let the weary, deferential mask of the waitress fall away entirely. In its place was the face of the sharp, passionate, and brilliant art historian she had been all along. My name, she said, speaking slowly and clearly, but choosing to deliver the final blow in the language he had used as a weapon for the benefit of all 3 men. Je m'appelle Amara Dubois. My name is Amara Dubois. She let the name hang in the air. To Gerald, it meant nothing, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Sterling Blackwood. She watched the flicker of confusion in his eyes, then the frantic, high-speed search through his mental Rolodex of vanquished foes. And then she saw it, the moment the connection was made, the moment the ghost in the machine was identified. His face went from ashen to the color of bone. It was a look of pure, soul-deep horror. He remembered. J'étais la conservatrice adjointe du Haitian Art Collective à Miami. Amara continued, pressing her advantage, her voice now resonating with the full weight of her stolen history. I was the associate curator at the Haitian Art Collective in Miami. J'étais celle qui a rédigé le rapport de provenance de 80 pages sur la collection Césaire, le rapport même que vous avez utilisé comme feuille de route pour démanteler la collection après avoir ruiné l'institution. Vous ne m'avez pas seulement fait licencier, Monsieur Blackwood, vous m'avez effacé et vous pensiez que j'avais disparu à jamais. I was the one who wrote the 80-page provenance report on the Césaire collection. The very report you used as a roadmap to dismantle the collection after you ruined the institution. You didn't just get me fired, Mr. Blackwood. You erased me, and you thought I had disappeared forever. She took a half-step closer to the table, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to an intense, caring whisper. Vous vous cachiez derrière vos avocats et vos sociétés écrans, mais j'ai toujours su que c'était votre œuvre. Je n'avais simplement pas de preuves. Jusqu'à ce soir, vous venez de me la servir sur un plateau d'argent avec vos insultes. You hid behind your lawyers and shell companies, but I always knew it was your work. I just never had proof. Until tonight. You just served it to me on a silver platter, along with your insults. Sterling Blackwood, the titan of industry, the king of Aurelia, was utterly speechless. He looked as though he had seen a phantom rise from a gilded grave, and in a way he had. The ghost of a life he had personally destroyed had just served him his coffee. Then a new voice entered the charged silence. It was Monsieur Dubois. He had watched the entire exchange with the quiet intensity of a grandmaster observing a chess match. He folded his hands on the table and looked from the shattered Blackwood to the resolute Amara. He addressed her directly, his formal Quebec French a stark contrast to Blackwood's European affectations. Mademoiselle Dubois, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. Votre nom m'est également familier. Le rapport de provenance que vous avez rédigé était une œuvre d'une érudition remarquable. Ma fondation a tenté de l'acquérir lors de la vente de liquidation pour le préserver. On nous a dit qu'il avait été égaré. Miss Dubois, your name is also familiar to me. The provenance report you wrote was a work of remarkable scholarship. My foundation attempted to acquire it at the liquidation sale, to preserve it. We were told it had been misplaced. He then turned his cool, discerning gaze upon Sterling Blackwood. Monsieur Blackwood, je crois que notre dîner est terminé, et notre partenariat potentiel l'est également. La Fondation Dubois ne s'associera pas à un projet qui sert de couverture au type de vandalisme culturel que vous venez de décrire avec tant d'enthousiasme. Nous ne serons pas le visage respectable de votre pillage. Mr. Blackwood, I believe our dinner is concluded, and so is our potential partnership. The Dubois Foundation will not be party to a project that serves as a cover for the kind of cultural vandalism you have just so enthusiastically described. We will not be the respectable face of your plunder. With that, he stood, gave a slight, formal bow in Amara's direction, a gesture of profound respect, and walked away from the table without a single backward glance, leaving behind a crater of silence in the smoldering wreckage of Sterling Blackwood's evening, his deal, and his carefully curated reputation. The departure of Monsieur Dubois acted like a starter pistol, jolting Sterling Blackwood out of his horrified paralysis and into a sputtering rage. His face, moments before a mask of shock, contorted into a dark thundercloud of pure fury and abject humiliation. You, he hissed at Amara, his voice a venomous whisper that trembled with uncontrolled anger. You're finished. You think this is some kind of victory? I will crush you. I will have you blacklisted from every establishment in this city. You'll be scrubbing toilets in a bus station for the rest of your miserable life. Do you hear me? His voice began to rise, cracking the rarefied atmosphere of the restaurant. Heads at nearby tables began to turn, conversations faltering as patrons scented the blood in the water. Julian, the manager, who had been observing the unfolding disaster from across the room with a look of pure panic, started striding purposefully towards their table. Amara stood her ground, unbowed. The threats that would have sent her spiraling into despair just hours ago now seemed pathetic and hollow. You already did your worst to me, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice clear and steady, switching back to English for all to hear. You took my career. You took my reputation. You took my future. You think threatening my waitressing job scares me? You just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud and outlined your predatory business model in front of a key witness? I think you're the one with bigger problems. Just then, Julian arrived, his face slick with sweat. Is there a problem here, Mr. Blackwood? He asked, his tone attempting a firmness that his trembling hands betrayed. This employee of yours, Blackwood spat, pointing a shaking finger at Amara. She's delusional. She's been harassing my guests, making wild, slanderous accusations. I want her fired, now." Julian looked from Blackwood's apoplectic face to Amara's unnervingly calm one. He had been in the service industry for 20 years. He knew the difference between a hysterical employee and a cornered wolf. "Amara," he said, his voice softer than she expected, "why don't you go to the back? Take a break. I'll handle this." "She's not taking a break. She's fired," Blackwood roared. "Actually," Amara said, her fingers moving to the small magnetic name tag on her apron. She unpinned it and placed it gently on the table, next to Blackwood's half-eaten dessert. "I quit." She looked at Julian, offering a small apologetic smile. "I'm sorry for the scene, Julian." He just shook his head slightly, a flicker of something, understanding, maybe even admiration in his eyes. "Go on, kid. Get out of here." As Amara turned to weave her way through the gawking diners, a calm hand gently touched her arm. She started, turning to see Monsieur Dubois. He had been waiting for her near the restaurant's grand entrance. He held out a simple, elegant business card. "Mademoiselle Dubois," he said, his voice low and serious. "What Mr. Blackwood did to you and what he planned for the Dusable archive. It is a sickness in our world. My flight back to Montreal is not until Friday morning. I would consider it a great honor if you would allow me to hear your full story. Perhaps," he added, a thoughtful look in his eyes, "we have mutual interests that extend beyond this evening." Amara looked down at the card. Jean-Pierre Dubois, President, the Dubois Foundation. It felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a lifeline cast from the most unexpected shore. "Thank you, Monsieur Dubois," she managed, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. I will call you." He gave another of his small formal bows and was gone. Amara walked through the swinging doors into the chaotic, clattering world of the kitchen. The stunned faces of her now former colleagues blurred as she passed. She didn't stop at her locker to change. She walked straight out the rear service exit and into the cool, damp air of the Chicago alleyway. She leaned against the rough brick wall, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving a tremor in its wake. She had done it. She had faced the monster who had haunted her every waking moment for 3 years. In one spectacular, terrifying act of defiance, she had detonated the quiet, miserable life she had built for herself. She was unemployed. She had no safety net. But for the first time since she had packed her life into 2 suitcases and fled Miami, she felt profoundly, breathtakingly free. The ghost was no longer whispering in her ear. She had given it a voice, and it had roared. Back inside Aurelia, Sterling Blackwood was left to simmer in the ruins. His 9-figure partnership was dead. His reputation before a major philanthropic player was not just tarnished, but obliterated. And a ghost from his past now had a name, a face, and a powerful new potential ally. As he slapped his Black American Express card on the table to pay the astronomical bill, his mind wasn't on the money. It was on one thing: silencing Amara Dubois. This time, for good. The first stone had been thrown, and it had struck an empire. The war was only just beginning. The 24 hours that followed Amara's dramatic exit from Aurelia were a dizzying cocktail of elation and raw terror. The initial surge of righteous power slowly receded, leaving behind the cold, hard shoreline of reality. She was unemployed, her savings were meager, and she had made an enemy of a man who measured his power in billions of dollars and legions of lawyers. Every siren she heard on the street made her jump. Every call from an unknown number sent a spike of ice through her veins. She spent a sleepless night in her small apartment, the quiet weight of Monsieur Dubois' business card on her nightstand a source of both hope and deep suspicion. His intervention had been a miracle, but Amara's experiences had taught her that miracles often came with hidden price tags. He was, after all, from the same rarefied world as Blackwood. Sharks, in her experience, didn't protect minnows. They just fought over territory. By dawn, a fragile resolve began to crystallize over her fear. She had already lost everything once. There was nothing left for Blackwood to take that truly mattered. She made a pot of strong coffee, her hands shaking only slightly, and dialed the number on the card. A crisp, bilingual assistant answered. When Amara gave her name, she was put through to Monsieur Dubois instantly. Mademoiselle Dubois, his voice was as measured and calm as it had been the night before. I am very glad you called. I have a suite at the Peninsula. Would you be able to meet me in 1 hour? I have asked my foundation's chief counsel to join us. An hour later, Amara found herself in a stately suite that felt less like a hotel room and more like the study of a private library with wood-paneled walls and shelves of leather-bound books. Monsieur Dubois was there, along with a sharp, formidable woman in her 60s named Hélène Rousseau, his legal counsel. There were no pleasantries. They got straight to the point. For the next 3 hours, Amara laid out her story in meticulous detail. She spoke of her passion for Haitian art, her painstaking work on the Césaire collection, and the pride she felt in completing the Provenance report that had been the culmination of her academic life. She described the arrival of Viridian Heritage Group, their false promises of preservation, and the swift, brutal asset stripping that followed. She recounted how subtle discrepancies planted in her digital records had been used to frame her for academic fraud, making it appear as though she had deliberately inflated the value of certain pieces. She explained how the collective's board, eager for a scapegoat, had fired her and blacklisted her within the tightly knit museum community. Defeated and disgraced, she had fled to Chicago to disappear. Dubois and Rousseau listened with unwavering attention. When she finished, Rousseau was the first to speak, her French precise and analytical. What you describe is Blackwood's classic playbook. Discredit from within, create a pretext for intervention, then acquire the assets at a fraction of their value. Your testimony is powerful, mademoiselle, but a man like Blackwood will paint you as a disgruntled, vindictive ex-employee. To truly hold him accountable, we need incontrovertible proof. We need your original, untampered report and the server logs showing it was altered. They're gone, Amara said, the old wave of hopelessness washing over her. They were on the collective's internal servers. My access was revoked the day I was fired. The files were surely wiped. Perhaps, Monsieur Dubois said, leaning forward, his eyes thoughtful. But men like Blackwood possess a fatal flaw: arrogance. They believe that once they have won, the battlefield is forgotten. They may believe the evidence is destroyed, but digital footprints are notoriously difficult to erase completely. Hélène, is there a path? Rousseau tapped a pen against her leather-bound notepad. It will be difficult. The collective has since been dissolved. The physical servers were likely sold for scrap, but their data that may have been migrated to a cloud archive. It's a long shot, but it's the only one we have. Monsieur Dubois then clarified his motives. His interest was not charity. The Dubois Foundation was dedicated to preserving cultural heritage, and Blackwood's predatory model was a direct threat to their mission. His attempt to use the foundation as a reputational shield for the DeSable archive plunder was a profound insult. Helping Amara was a matter of principle, but it was also a strategic necessity, a chance to neutralize a predator who was poisoning the well. We have resources, Mademoiselle Dubois, he stated, technological, legal, and financial. We can hire the best digital forensics team in the country, but they will be flying blind. We need your expertise. You know the file names, the server architecture, the security protocols. You are the map maker for this expedition. Just as this improbable alliance was being cemented, Amara's phone buzzed with a call from a Miami area code. She froze. It was a number she didn't recognize. Rousseau nodded for her to answer, and she put the call on speaker. Hello? Amara? Is this Amara Dubois? The voice was hesitant, female, and instantly familiar. Yes. Who is this? It's Chloe. Chloe Sanchez. I was the IT administrator at the collective. Amara sank back into her chair, stunned. Chloe had been a quiet, nervous woman who had always avoided eye contact. Chloe, how did you get my number? I have a cousin who works at Aurelia, Chloe said, her words tumbling out in a rush. She called me this morning. She told me what happened last night, what you did. Amara, I am so sorry. I was always so ashamed. What they did to you was wrong. Chloe, what is it? After they fired you, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, they ordered me to wipe the servers. Everything. Your files, your emails, everything. But I couldn't. Your report, it was a beautiful piece of work. I knew it was important. So I made a copy, a full disk image of your home directory. I backed it up to an encrypted external drive. I was too scared to ever say anything, but I never erased it. I still have it, Amara. I have the drive. The room was silent. Amara stared at her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The one piece of evidence she believed was gone forever, the digital ghost that Rousseau and Dubois had just theorized about, was real. It wasn't on some forgotten cloud server in Iceland. It was on a hard drive in a closet in Miami. "There's more," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "The person who gave the order to alter your records wasn't from the board. It was an outside consultant they brought in from Viridian Heritage. He worked on my machine for an hour. I remember his name. It was Gerald Finch." The final devastating piece clicked into place. Gerald, Blackwood's sniveling lapdog at the dinner table, wasn't just his lawyer. He was his hatchet man. Amara looked from her phone to Monsieur Dubois and Hélène Rousseau. Their expressions were grim, focused, and resolute. The hunt was no longer for a ghost. They had a weapon, they had a witness, and they had a target. An alliance forged in a Chicago hotel suite had just been armed by a conscience in Miami. The war against Sterling Blackwood was about to become very real. The following weeks transformed the stately Peninsula Suite into a high-tech command center. Whiteboards covered in network diagrams and legal statutes replaced the tasteful landscape paintings. The air, once scented with potpourri, now hummed with the quiet intensity of servers and encrypted phone calls. Amara, who had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, was now the undeniable center of a formidable operation. Hélène Rousseau moved with the lethal grace of a seasoned general, directing a team of lawyers in Chicago and Miami. She filed a carefully worded lawsuit on Amara's behalf against the now-defunct Haitian Art Collective and, by extension, its successor entity, Viridian Heritage Group. It was a legal Trojan horse designed not for a quick settlement, but to grant them the power of legal discovery. Meanwhile, Chloe's hard drive arrived by secure courier. It was handed over to a digital forensics expert named Kenji, a prodigy who saw data not as ones and zeros, but as a story waiting to be told. Amara sat with him for 2 days, guiding him through the labyrinth of her old files, her memory of the server's structure proving to be flawless. Blackwood's people were clumsy, Kenji announced on the 3rd day, pointing to his screen. They thought deleting a file was enough, but the ghost of the original document remains in the drive's unallocated space until it's overwritten. It's fragmented, but it's here. For the next 72 hours, Kenji painstakingly rebuilt the document from thousands of scattered data fragments. Finally, he called Amara over. On his monitor, 2 documents were displayed side by side. One was the altered report used to discredit her, riddled with falsified acquisition dates and inflated valuations. The other was her original work, pristine and meticulously researched. "Now for the magic," Kenji said, a rare smile touching his lips. He brought up the metadata, the digital fingerprint of each file. "Your original report was last modified at 3:42 p.m. on June 12th, 3 years ago. The fraudulent version was created at 5:17 p.m. the same day. And the user account that created it?" He clicked a button. The name on the screen was G. Finch Art Consultant. It was the smoking gun. They now had absolute proof of Gerald Finch's digital intrusion. Their focus then shifted to Gerald himself. A team of private investigators, hired by Dubois, began to discreetly assemble a profile. They discovered he was a man living far beyond his means, with a secret gambling addiction and substantial debts owed to a Las Vegas casino. He wasn't just Blackwood's loyal counsel. He was a compromised man, trapped by his own vices. The final act was set. Hélène Rousseau arranged a meeting with Gerald Finch at his own law office, ostensibly to discuss a preliminary settlement offer for the frivolous lawsuit. Gerald arrived looking smug, expecting to intimidate Amara and her Canadian benefactor into a swift retreat. He walked into his own conference room to find not just Hélène and Monsieur Dubois, but also Amara, standing calm and composed by the window overlooking LaSalle Street. Kenji, the forensics expert, sat at the head of the table with a laptop. "Mr. Finch," Hélène began, foregoing any pleasantries, "we are here to discuss your activities on June 12th, 3 years ago." Gerald's smug expression faltered. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Allow me to refresh your memory, Kenji said, turning his laptop screen toward Gerald. Displayed in stark detail were the two versions of the report, the metadata, and the G. Finch consultant user ID. Gerald's face went white. He began to bluster, threatening lawsuits and sanctions. Hélène let him exhaust himself. Then she slid a second folder across the polished mahogany table. It contained detailed records of his offshore bank accounts and correspondence with the casino's debt collectors. My client, Mademoiselle Dubois, has no real interest in your personal financial indiscretions, Mr. Finch, Hélène said, her voice like chilled steel. She wants the man who gave you the orders. You have one opportunity, a full, signed, and videotaped deposition detailing Sterling Blackwood's direct involvement in the fraudulent alteration of these records and the entire scheme to defraud the Haitian Art Collective. In return, this second folder remains private. If you refuse, we will present both folders to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They will be far more interested in a cooperating witness than a co-conspirator. Cornered, exposed, and with the specter of financial ruin and disbarment looming, Gerald Finch crumbled. Over the next 2 hours, with a court stenographer and a camera recording his every word, he confessed to everything, detailing Blackwood's direct orders, his methods, and his contemptuous dismissal of Amara as collateral damage. With Gerald's confession, their arsenal was complete. They didn't leak it to the press. Monsieur Dubois wanted something more dramatic, more personal. He discovered that Blackwood was the guest of honor at the Chicago Cultural Foundation's annual gala, a black tie event where he was set to receive a Philanthropist of the Year award. The night of the gala, Amara walked into the grand ballroom of the Art Institute of Chicago. She was not wearing a waitress uniform, but an elegant, simple black gown. She was on Monsieur Dubois' arm. As they entered, a ripple of confusion went through the assembled crowd of Chicago's elite. When the time came for Blackwood's award, he took the stage to polite applause, his face beaming with self-satisfaction. He began his speech, a hypocritical ode to the importance of preserving culture. As he spoke, the large screens on either side of the stage, meant to be showing a slideshow of his philanthropic achievements, flickered. Instead of photos of Blackwood shaking hands, the screen suddenly showed the two provenance reports, side by side, with the fraudulent changes highlighted in red. Then a video began to play. Gerald Finch, his face pale and sweaty, confessing in damning detail every aspect of Blackwood's scheme. A wave of shocked gasps swept through the ballroom. Blackwood froze at the podium, his speech dying on his lips. His face, projected in high definition on the giant screens, cycled through shock, rage, and finally, pure, unadulterated panic. When the video ended, Monsieur Dubois walked calmly to the stage, took the microphone from the paralyzed Blackwood, and addressed the stunned audience. "It appears," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "that the Foundation has made a grave error in its selection this year. True philanthropy builds. It does not destroy. It honors. It does not erase." He turned to look for Amara, who was standing near the stage. He gestured for her to join him. "This is Mademoiselle Amara Dubois," he announced, "a brilliant scholar whose career was nearly destroyed by the man you see before you. She is the true guest of honor tonight." The fallout was a media firestorm. Federal investigations were launched. Blackwood's board of directors, facing a tidal wave of outrage and investor panic, fired him in a terse, one-sentence press release. His name became a synonym for cultural piracy. He was ruined not just financially, but socially, a pariah in the very circles he had fought so ruthlessly to dominate. A few weeks later, Amara met Monsieur Dubois in the now empty suite at the Peninsula. The law firm had secured a massive settlement on her behalf, a number with so many zeros it felt like a misprint. But the money was secondary. "You have a choice, Amara," Dubois said. "You can take this victory and return to your life, your name and reputation more than restored. Or you can help me ensure that no one else suffers the same fate." He laid out his proposal, a new independent wing of the Dubois Foundation, the Cultural Integrity Initiative. It would be a watchdog organization with teeth, providing legal aid, digital security, and financial support to small, vulnerable cultural institutions facing predatory acquisition. It would be a shield for the defenseless. I need someone to lead it, he said. Someone with the mind of a scholar, the heart of an artist, and the steel of a survivor. Someone who knows exactly what we are fighting against. Amara looked out the window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. She had come to this city to be invisible, to hide from a world that had wronged her. Now she was being offered a chance not just to rejoin that world, but to change it. She would not be a curator of objects in a quiet room. She would be a guardian of legacies. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, the first truly joyful smile she had felt in years. Monsieur Dubois, she said, her voice clear, steady, and filled with purpose. When do we start?